1 week of practice is in the books, and there's still major questions along the offensive line.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back in to another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as playoffs wind down. The sport stops sporting like you want them to, but this summer FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Lars got a really fun show today. We're going to be breaking down everything we saw from Washington's first week of practice, and we're also going to be getting into some of the biggest adjustments we want to see the Huskies make offensively, defensively, all over the place in week 2. And the only real place that we can start here is with the offensive line, where there's still some major questions that need to be answered after 1 week.
Yeah, but I think it's naturally where we thought it would be, where
Absolutely.
we knew the answer wasn't going to come in week 1 or even week 2. And I think, honestly, I would not be surprised if they go into that week 1 against Weber State not truly knowing the best set of 5. I think it's become pretty clear you like D'Angelo at center, Drew Azzopardi at right tackle, Gaard Memmelaar has looked pretty good coming back from his injury at left guard. But after that, right guard, I could see some change. Left tackle certainly could, leave. There's something to be desired there. But at the same point, they're still not anywhere close to football shape. So I would give these guys another week at least, into probably practice. What do you want to say, 12, 13?
Sure.
Before you really start to say, okay, which guys are truly struggling and how much of it is picking up scheme and just how much of it is physically struggling, because then you have to look at the other side of that equation. Well, do you tip the cap to the defense? Because I think on some level, that's kind of part of it.
I've got to take there, yeah.
And I think that's part of it where, Maximus, Swanee, and whoever pushes at left tackle, they might struggle either way. So I don't think that's because of those guys in particular and their skill set as much as it is the other guys coming opposed to them and actually making it a little more difficult than, say, last fall camp.
No, absolutely. And that's something where, I like everything you said there. And one thing that I wanted to touch on was you talked about TT Lee at center. I think that position is far from being decided. Where the first couple of days we saw Zach Henning with the first team there. The last couple of days it's been TT Lee. He really struggled in his first day. He had a couple of bad snaps there, and I'm sure that's something that they're going to figure out. But I have a feeling that once Landen Hatchett throws himself into the mix there, we might see some of Zach Henning at right guard. We might see some of D'Angelo TT Lee there, just to find as many different combinations as you possibly can to roll out there and see what works best. Where it as you said, it's certainly very far from decided. I believe the same thing at left tackle. We've seen Swanee Fasolo there. I certainly think we're going to see more of Maximus McCree as he continues to work into football shape. And I'm still in the camp that we should see some Justin Hilkema there as well, where just in terms of size, movement ability, he has all of those traits. And yes, I understand what what it means to start a true freshman tackle in the Big Ten, but that's where we are at this point along the offensive line, where there's so many questions, especially at that position at left tackle, where you might as well see what you have in all of the guys that you could possibly put there. And Paki Fee now is another freshman where, you see what he's like in the rotation. He's gotten a lot of snaps with the second team, which has really impressed me. I really like, just what we've seen from him in terms of he's put on a lot of weight, and it doesn't seem to have affected his movement at all. And certainly, you have some questions with him putting on 15, 20 pounds, whatever it is, over the course of the summer, and you want to make sure he stays healthy and his body is acclimated to the weight. But if he's able to do that, which so far it looks like he's been able to, yeah, that's fine. You might as well give him a shot. You might as well see what you got. So I think that there are a lot of things that will work itself out about this position, because going into the Big Ten, this is the biggest question mark. Like I've got a lot that I want to say about the pass rush, and I'm going to get to it, because I certainly don't think that all the fault is along the offensive line. I think that this defensive line is really, really good. Like, this defensive line is going to be better than people think. And a lot of that comes from Sebastian Valdez. And again, we'll get there, but I can't put all the blame along the offensive line, but it's certainly far from perfect.
Right. And what I think what we're getting at is once we get into that week 3 of fall camp, then you'll start to, because I think Pocky's one where either on the left side or the right side at guard, I think he could find some playing time this fall. Same thing with Zach Henning, like you mentioned. But I think getting those guys equal reps with Damon Williams, which we've seen a lot of in the first couple of weeks, in the first couple of days of practice, where Damon's working with that second team offense, and you're having a lot of those younger guys like Tafai and I think that's just as important to build that cohesion because even after the season, well, first of all, we're not expecting DeMond to play a ton this season. Secondly, most of those relationships you're going to have in 25 and 26 and beyond. So I'm almost okay seeing how they're kind of progressing that, knowing, okay, let's get Will with D'Angelo and kind of we'll figure out heading to mix in there because he got some time with him in the spring. But I think you're really kind of saying in this first week, building 2 different lines of, okay, which guys can we kind of split both because we want them to play this season, and how many of these guys, like Hilkema might fall into that trap where he might play more than 4 games, but I could see him getting 4 and saying, hey, let's just kind of let Max and Sawane figure it out this season. Now, again, to your point, he might also not give him a chance. And I think that's the other side of this coin. But we're day 4 into camps, day 2 in pads. So there's only so much you're going to be able to glean from that. So like I said, once you start getting into practice 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, you have a way better idea than what you're looking at right now. But I think the important thing is all the pieces are there to figure it out. You just got to find the right combination.
Yeah, I agree. And that kind of is the biggest thing where, that's why there are still so many question marks is they know what's going on. They know that there's so many questions, that there's so much chemistry stuff that needs to be worked out along that group. And once that gets figured out, it'll be fine. Like it's not going to be an elite offensive line by any stretch of the imagination. But I think with the talent that's there and the upside that's there, I don't think it's going to be a bad one. It'll be middle of the road, and that's going to be serviceable enough for 1 year. And, the time and the resources that they put into the offensive line, it'll be better as it goes on. And that's going to be really helpful. But we're not worried about 2025 right now. We're worried about 2024. And you've got to find a way to get through this season. And I feel that, we've reported on some of the offensive line combinations getting through that first week. And once we get into the next one, I feel like there's going to be more. And in week 3, there's going to be more. And by week 4, maybe we're going to see the first solid group. And a lot of that also does depend on Landen Hatchett.
Exactly. And that's the one guy where, to be fair, we still haven't seen him. And again, that was kind of why when I asked Jedd at media day that question, where it's, okay, is he actually going to be starting camp, or are we thinking a couple of weeks into fall camp is when he starts to hit the ground running? And it seems like the latter is going to be the answer, which is still good, right? Because you're still talking about Landen being healthy by week 1, probably running start to get him going week 2 or 3. You figure out those combinations against inferior programs, and then you go into the Big Ten with an actual idea of what your offensive line is going to look like and how the communication is all going to line up. But yeah, and then, I think Gaard is, proven more than capable at left guard coming back from his injury. So I think it's really coming down to 3 positions. It's a left tackle, center, and right guard. Everything else, again, nothing is set in stone, obviously, but Drew Azzopardi on the right tackle, you kind of like what you have there. And I think when you look at the depth at right tackle, that might be a potential, not cause for concern, but maybe it's where you maybe see Max kick over there and try some different things as they get going in camp. Because at some point, you might want to have a second option just to have whoever's in that 2D spot behind Drew Azzopardi, still going to have to play. So you might want to figure that one out somewhat soon.
But like we said, this is, over the course of the spring too, this is exactly where we'd expect it to be at this point in time. And with that being said, Lars, let's take some of the big standouts from week 1. Right after a message from our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors does everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether it's speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash, all the parts you need, the prices you want. It's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Lars, I want to start this one off because we had a lot of things that we saw from guys that we liked in week one. And you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I don't think any of them were as impactful or as good as Sebastian Valdez was this week, where the more I watched him, I was just so impressed. And we got to talk to him after Sunday's practice. And one thing that one person that he credited with a lot of that was Logan Sagapolu, the Miami transfer at defensive tackle, where he said, yeah, having a guy, as we've said on this program over the past week or so, having a guy who's able to eat up two gaps and just play a true nose tackle allows me to do so much more, where I can play a 4-eye, I can play a 3, I can play all over the place. And it allows me to get, one-on-one reps. It allows me to, feel a lot more freedom as a pass rusher and so many different things, which was something I was really excited about because when you look at the kind of role that he can play in this defense, he's shown to be big enough, strong enough, athletic enough to play in the Big Ten. And I think that he truly can be one of the more disruptive defensive tackles in this conference, which is something that we haven't seen at Washington in such a long time and can be such a crucial part of this defense moving forward.
Yeah, 100%. No notes missed, no notes statted. I couldn't agree more. I'm really glad you mentioned Logan Sagapolu because he's the one that ties the entire line together. And I don't think he's the MVP per se, but he's the most impactful player. When you look at what is he going to allow other guys, to your point, Valdez, Ward on the edge, Durfee on the edge. But the one guy that I want to kind of highlight is a guy that we knew how good he was going to be. But when we look back at spring, I don't think Ephesians Prysock had the best spring that he could have. That's no slight to Ephesians Prysock, but I think today especially, he answered the bell every single time. And I'm talking left side, right side, end zone. And he's a very soft-spoken guy in terms of he likes a lot of these DBs like to let their play on the field do the talking for them. Jordan Shaw is another guy just like that. But the thing about this defense is Sebastian can be great. You can have the pass rush, the linebackers, all that. But if you don't have some outside corners that can cook, you're going to have a problem. And I think the growth that we've seen from Ephesians Prysock this fall, again, it's still less than a week into fall camp, but knowing what he did at Arizona opposite Takario Davis, and today we saw it at times where we actually had Elijah Jackson and Thaddeus Dixon so they all three were on the field at the same time, I believe. Yeah. And that to me kind of tells you what John Richardson's thinking with the secondary, and you can't coach length. And I think that to me is the big key for me, because if having Ephesians Prysock lock in against Jeremiah Hunter, lock in against Denzel Boston, who are one a little bit more established than the other, but two guys that we both know can have success on the outside. I think he only allowed like 1 or 2 catches the entire practice in terms of legitimate 11 on 11 reps, because the one-on-ones were a little bit different. But I will say, even in the one-on-ones, he held his own against Denzel going in the end zone when they had that period. So I like what I saw from Ephesians today, and I just think he's a guy that just seems to be stacking days on top of days.
So that's actually what I was looking at as you were talking. I had most of the one-on-ones written down and some of the big plays in there, and some of the big plays in the team period as well. He did allow 1 touchdown today on it was a 25-yard score from Will Rogers to Jeremiah Hunter. But outside of that, he was basically perfect on the day. He did a really good job. He played really strong defense in the one-on-one period, where it's just 5-yard, it's a touchdown or a PBU or sometimes a missed throw. But those are, the big results there. And he did a really good job against Denzel and against Jeremiah in that period as well. And that was something that, we saw a lot from him in the spring, and he certainly became a lot better. Where, we asked him after practice, what was one of the biggest things that you wanted to improve on over the course of the spring, from the spring to now. And he said, I want to be better in press. And yeah, he was better in press, where I think that was one of the biggest things in terms of, he didn't allow free releases in the spring, which is one of the reasons that, Denzel was so great. Was Denzel has become an incredible at, releasing off the line of scrimmage in a whole bunch of different ways. Jeremiah's really good at that as well. But I think that EP got a lot better in terms of counters. in terms of press and just playing with strength and using his length and using his physicality to get better in all that as well. And Lars, I got another one that I want to give a shout out to here, but we want to thank you for making Locked On Huskies your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On College Football podcast. Our guy Spencer McLaughlin gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron with discussions on the upcoming season and the ever-changing landscape of college athletics, including conference realignment, the transfer portal, NIL, new college football, expanded playoffs, and more. Locked On College Football is available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Another one that I want to give a shout out to is Quentin Moore. Something we've seen him just be really awesome at is, setting the edge as a tight end and letting running backs get to their spot. We saw, as we talked about in the first segment, we saw some struggles from the running game because the defensive line has been so good, because they're still figuring things out on the offensive line. But every time you look at Quentin Moore, he's doing his job and he's doing it very, very well. He's done a good job, developing as a pass catcher and a route runner a little bit, but he is a really, really good run blocker too.
No, I'm glad you mentioned the pass catching ability, because I think he was the first guy in that one-on-one period when they went into the Husky Stadium earlier on Sunday, where he had, I forgot who it was against, but he beat
Cam Broussard. I got it right here. Yeah,
that I knew it was one of the two safeties. I couldn't remember which one it was, but yeah, that was vicious too. It wasn't like he actually juiced him off the line a little bit. Like, he had created some separation without even using his hands. The one guy that kind of in that dependable mode that I wanted to talk about was Kevin Green Jr. Not a popular name, not in terms of, maybe he might not have a ton of success in terms of production this season, but he was a carryover from what we saw with him briefly at Arizona. DeMond found him, I think, 3 or 4 times in a row on one drive that led to a touchdown. And it was just so simple in the flat routes, simple, basically dependable routes. And I think that seems to be the answer for, when it comes to Kevin Green, is might not have a ton of catches, might not have more than, let's just say, 15, 20 catches this season or targets this season. But I think he'd have 10 to 15 catches within that. Sure. And I think it just kind of speaks to his game. And so when you start to look at some of those other guys in that room, Keith Reynolds in that same position, right? Jason Robinson had a couple nice catches today. I'm intrigued to see how that room develops behind Giles, because that was one thing that I also wanted to talk about, was that kind of just the whole slot receiver position. When you look at what Giles was able to do today, Jedd Fisch right at the bat was like, Giles, it's exactly how we want it to look. And so you can clearly see Giles is growing in this offense, but there's so many guys behind him, Kevin Green, Keith Reynolds. There's so many guys that can fill that slot as well. I'm curious how much the gap is going to be in terms of production and impact, because Kevin Green, I think, is going to find a role in this team this season.
Yeah.
Will it be a big role? No. And I want to, preface it by saying all this, but I think we start to look at some of these other additions and, Daniel Ngata, what he's able to do with the run game. They seem to be finding guys where it might not be the biggest role, but they are intentionally finding guys' roles like, okay, you can do 1 or 2 things. This is how you're going to see the field. You're going to do 1 or 2 things. This is how you're going to see the field. And that's a good problem to have, because when you look at all the talent on this offense, there's so much talent. No way you're going to have most of these guys standing on the sideline. But at the same point, how do you manage those reps and targets? That'll be what'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I really like where you're going with that. Giving a shout out to Giles there. He had a really nice whip route to beat Jordan Shaw in the one-on-one period that I think, all the wide receivers just were like, ooh, that. I always love it when you get an audible reaction from your teammates, because that's just always when you know that it was a really, really nice play. The last guy that I really wanted to give a shout out to here, I'm going back to my agenda here, is Justin Harrington. We haven't seen him do a whole lot of contact stuff yet, because he's still coming off an ACL injury that he suffered at Oklahoma, and he's still wearing, a brace on the right leg, but he's doing a lot, and his veteran presence shows up in a huge way on the field. I remember we're down watching some of the red zone stuff on the far side of the practice field, and you could hear him just calling out the plays, calling out motion, calling out everything that was going on. And one of the reasons that I thought it was so crucial, because Lars, do you know who the 2 guys that weren't on the field during that play? It was Carson Bruner and Alfonso Tupatala. He was working with a lot of the second string guys. And as that 6th-year senior, he stepped up, he took charge, and he was calling out plays. He was calling out assignments, calling out everything that needs to happen, which is crucial. Because when we talked to Steve Belichick, he talked about having a couple different guys wearing the microphone, which is one of the new additions in college football this season. And you and I fully expect Carson to wear the green dot, to call the plays, to have that headset in his ears. But if he's not able to be on the field, and of course you have a whole bunch of veteran linebackers where Tupatala might be that guy, or Brian Parham or Drew Fowler might be that guy, since you have so many, veteran linebackers in the middle. But if you want to go somewhere else, it's always nice to have a veteran guy who knows where everybody's supposed to be and every single assignment on each play. And having that on the back end, and Justin Harrington, who also did have a nice PBU on a blitz today. I believe it was on Damon Williams, had a really nice PBU where he was blitzing and just got up to knock a pass down. It was really nice to see. And with that being said, there are still a lot of adjustments this team needs to make. Let's talk about some of the biggest ones. Right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel is an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. And one guy that is really sneaking up the MVP odds over on FanDuel on the AL side of things. I really want to talk about Rafael Devers here, just, to get my Boston stuff in there, but I'm not going to, because there is no hotter hitter on the planet right now than Bobby Witt Jr. Watching that guy play is just an absolute treat. I believe he hit 489 in the month of July. And yeah, Aaron Judge has 41 homers, 100 RBIs, whatever it is. But Bobby Witt is just turning into a superstar right before our eyes. And his MVP odds on FanDuel are in a really nice spot. You should go check him out. Lars, getting into week 2 of practice here, as the everydayers are listening to this, we're probably on our way to Monday morning's practice over at Husky Stadium. And what are some things that you're looking for in week 2 of practice?
So aside from the obvious, because we'll probably we both can touch on the offensive line a little bit, but I think the one thing that I'm intrigued to see is, does that second cornerback slot get solved in the next week or so? Because I think that's one for me where, if we know what efficiency price lock is going to be on one side, does Jordan Shaw start to push over there? Because Dyson McCutcheon at the Husky position has looked pretty decent. Leroy Bryant also had a pretty solid day, kind of another guy that I could have left off in that second segment there, but we'll talk about him now, because I think there's so many different guys that can kind of do a couple of different things. I know we like Thad, I know we like Elijah, but I think the one thing that we've noticed, there hasn't been a ton of turnovers. So I think I'm curious to see which one of those cornerbacks can start to force something. And it could be Shea, it could be DeMont, it could be Will. Whoever is the one throwing it, I don't care. But the fact that we haven't seen a ton of interceptions, to me, there's something to be desired at that second cornerback spot. So I'm curious, because Elijah had a great day had a couple PBEs in the end zone and things like that. That had a pretty solid day in his own right. But I think that cornerback 2 spot eventually, probably within the next week or so, is going to get a little more hammered out. So that's what I'll be looking at.
So I just want to push back on one thing you said there, where I don't mind that we haven't seen a lot of interceptions, where one thing that we're seeing just this John Richardson coach group do really well is they're not always going for the big play, but they're playing it safe, not in terms of, let the guy get beat underneath and we're just going to rally to the ball and tackle. No, it's, if this guy's going up, we're making sure that it's a very, very tough catch on the sideline. I remember that was at one point during, watching them run, it wasn't one-on-ones. I think it was in a 7-on-7 period. John Richardson walked over to receivers and said, everything you have is going to be one-handed. We are going to challenge you every single step of the way. And I love that, because they're forcing guys to the sideline. They're forcing them into really tight, just in a really tough catches. And we saw Denzel Boston make one on the far side of the field in the end zone. But before he was able to get his feet down, he got forced out of bounds. And those are a lot of things that I like from watching this group. It's, some of these receivers have made some really, really nice plays on the ball, but the corners and the safeties are not letting them get their feet down. They are making sure that they're getting pushed out of bounds or doing one thing or the other. And it's really smart, and it's a really safe way to go about it. But I really, really like that. So with that being said, one thing that I really want to see is, I want to see some more out of Damon Williams when he's on structure, when he's in rhythm. Where there were a couple times today where he made a few inaccurate throws, just in terms of, with receivers coming out of their breaks. He's reading it well. He's doing the right thing, but it looks like the timing is a little bit off. Maybe it's because of the offensive line. It's one reason or it's another. And That's one thing I want to see a little bit more from him going forward, because he made a really, really nice off-platform throw. I believe it was to Camden Sermon. Made a really, really nice throw where he ducked under a pass rusher that was coming up inside, and he found a seam and found Camden Sermon in the end zone. Really, really nice play, getting off structure. And I'm sure whenever Damon Williams takes over as the full-time starter, we're going to see a lot of that from him. And that's awesome. But you also want to make sure that he's hitting some of those quick routes, those quick developing plays, because he does a fantastic job of getting the ball out of his hands fast. And when it's on target, he's going to be lethal. I feel like he can be a guy that completes 68, 69, 70% of his passes at the college level.
I'm with you. I do think that kind of stemmed early on in practice. They all were missing long. They were the one-on-one period. And again, it's still early. It's still day 4, so I'm not necessarily worried about it. But I think it more or less. I think the reason why I'm not worried about it is because we've seen the arm strength from Damon and Will.
Absolutely. Well. Sorry, so I just want to say I'm definitely not worried about it. That was just something where I want to see that adjustment, that development from him moving forward.
No, and I'm with you on that. I just kind of wanted to offer both sides of that, saying I don't think it's necessarily a concern that they're missing, but it's still worth noting that they are missing. But I do think the kind of within that element is I like the way they're building this development and competition with Will and Damon, where Will was towards the end of practice. Will was dropping some Southern profanity laced comments towards the offense, get going, guys, come on, let's not waste these plays. It's but it's giving Will a good kind of person pushing him, not saying Will or Damon, you do your thing, I'm just here for a year. You can really see Will is invested on making Damon better, while also making sure his offense is still just as good, because he knows if I coach up Damon or I help Damon a little too much, and maybe Damon starts cooking better than me, he might actually replace me. So I think in that respect, it's a good, healthy competition. But I think the one thing that ties it all together that now we need to kind of rehash, bring back the offensive line, is how quickly can this offensive line get into shape? Because when we start to look back at this, where clearly it's not a communication issue in terms of getting the line lined up, getting everybody in position, where nobody's gotten beat poorly. I think that's at least agree. Well, as I say that, now that I think about it, Alfonso did have one earlier today on Sunday where he just,
that was a really good rep from him. Yeah.
Bulldozed through. So there's been a couple of issues in that respect, but overall you haven't seen any one lineman get just obliterated. But I think in that same light, because you haven't seen the offensive line dominate like we might not expect them to,
we got accustomed to last year.
Right, exactly. And I think the other thing is, I think we're still understanding Jedd Fisch's offense and how it looks at Washington, where when we look back at what he did at Arizona, you had Jonah Morgan, Jonah Savannah, all those guys, that was like year 2 and 3 in the offense. So this is now we kind of got to back it up and say, okay, now you're bringing in some talent, mixing it with what you had returning. So there's still going to be a learning curve, but I'm just I'm not concerned, I should say. I'm more intrigued as to how quickly can you crest that bridge to find, okay, now you're in football shape. Now you just got to figure out which one or two guys you're going to be splitting reps in what positions, because at some point, the longer that offensive line becomes a question, the more of an actual concern it does become. So I'm just curious, when does that bend come? When does McCree start to round into football shape? Does TT Elite kick over? And I think this kind of coincides with the 17th, where Landen comes back. You get to see him at center, and then you get to see D'Angelo at right guard or wherever you want to. And now we'll start to have a better idea of the multiplicity of the offensive line.
So I really like where you're going with that, because my last point is also very, very similar. One major problem that we did see, and this one was a problem, was the run blocking and the run fits on the offensive side, where Jonah Coleman and Cameron Davis, for a good portion of the team period, there were not very many holes for them to run through. And I was impressed with the twos, where Daniel Ngata did a really, really nice job finding space. And I feel that whatever it is that needs to be done, and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, right? Where is it the defensive line, or is it the offensive line? Is it a combination of both? Where it looks like the Steve Belichick scheme is working really, really well when it comes to collapsing run lanes and just making sure everything is just fit really tight there. When you talk about Logan Sakapolu, Sebastian Valdez, all those guys, they're doing a really great job with that. But at the same point, let's see how the offense responds. Let's see how they react. Are you going to find more ways to try to, get Jonah Coleman or Cameron Davis off tackle, or to get the ball to Jordan Washington in space, where we saw, some of that sort of stuff. And, the more I think about it, that's the biggest thing, where if you really want to be able to make sure that this offensive line can take a step forward, you want to make sure that you're going to be running the ball effectively. And just the more I think about it, like we saw Jonah make plays in space. Like we saw Will hit him out of the backfield on a swing route a couple of times, and he was able to make a guy miss, pick up 9, 10, 11 yards. And it was great. And that just shows the talent that he has with the ball in his hands. But you want to see it out of the backfield as well. You want to make sure it's easy on him, that, he can get north-south and do it quickly and, do what he did last year, where he's averaged 7.5 yards a touch at Arizona. It's possible because we've seen him do it before, but as of right now, it doesn't look like it's going to be easy.
No, and I think that's the thing, is where Jedd said after Saturday's practice, or Friday's practice, Friday's practice.
Friday,
yeah, where they intentionally went about 75% run, and I think that might still carry into next week, because they do need some help in that regard, and there's only so much that Jonah and Cam can bounce outside. And again, if you're talking about getting him the ball in space, we know Will can do that, and we know Damon can do that to a certain degree, but in the Big Ten, you have to run between the tackles. You have to have a semblance of, we don't want 2021 Washington, where we saw what happened when you don't have a semblance of a true run game on the inside because your offensive line is so atrocious. That cannot happen again. And so I'm not saying that's the case, but I do think that's kind of a barometer to say, I don't care how 85%, 90% to get that run going. You maybe just run the entire practice until you can figure out, okay, we can get more than three yards in a cloud of dust with some of these run attempts.
Absolutely. Lars, that being said, thank you as always for being here. Thank you to the everydayers tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. And if you want so much more from these practices, from all that sort of stuff, make sure to check out our Locked On Huskies Insider program. It's down in the description below. You get a 2-week free trial, and it's $4.99 after that. We're uploading just the uncut versions of every single interview that we're getting at practice, which you're not going to be able to find anywhere else. We're dropping our practice reports there first before anywhere else. We're even throwing a little bit extra for anyone who is subscribed there. You get a chance to chat with us one-on-one. We're going to do a Q&A for our insiders only there very, very soon. And we've got so many more features that we're working on, and it's really going to be a blast. And that being said, make sure thank you for making Locked On Huskies your first listen of the day. Now it's time to go check out Locked On College Football, from NIL deals to the never-ending conference realignment rumors. Spencer McLaughlin is getting you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron. You can find the link to Locked On College Football in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And make sure you subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating the channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell, so you never miss when we post a new video. You got any questions, comments, concerns, anything like that, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us 5-star reviews. It does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Tuesday.